More powerfully than many other institutions, SOAS illustrates the connection between knowledge and power. Initially established to advance British scholarship, science and commerce in Asia and Africa, and provide training to British administrators and colonial officials, it was essentially an educational companion to the British Imperial Mission. The knowledge produced and taught at the university, therefore, was intimately tied to British violence and conquest abroad. 100 years later, the Decolonising SOAS campaign aims to illuminate this history and investigate to what extent the institution, or more specifically its knowledge production and its social relations, are still embedded in its past. With this in mind, we interviewed some students to discuss their personal perspectives and experiences of SOAS.
I think my relationship with SOAS has evolved and changed significantly as I've been there more and more years. At the beginning, I think it was more about like, oh wow, this is university, it's a cool place, la la la. But as the years have gone on, I'm just there to just go in and get out, really, just to do my business and get out. So it's become more of a business-like, just A to B relationship, that's all. It's no kind of flowery stuff. Like, I just go there, do my business and leave, and that's that.
Yeah, I was told that SOAS was initially set up to train colonists about the regions of the world that they were going to. My dad, because we're Caribbean, like, he told me that people like Walter Rodney came here, and his experience was basically the institution hadn't changed that much by that time. So he told me to expect that there might be still similarities with that experience today, even though it might be masked. Well, there are differences, definitely. The initial purpose of the university is the same, even though that's changed, and it does have a more democratic face. At the end of the day, the university is set up to educate people to go into the third world, or if the third world's the right term now, I don't know, but to go into Africa and Asia and serve up the benefits of Europe, essentially.
You have a colonial institution that, arguably coloniality is still embedded within this institution. And then it's the 100th year, you have students saying, well, look, we need to critically assess the history and not let it be just a celebration, because it also did have a big part to play in the Imperial Mission across the world in Africa and Asia. Its motto is knowledge is power, so that says a lot.
I sort of stumbled across SOAS as well, so it's obviously more of an option now than maybe it was when I was thinking of going there, because I didn't know of SOAS, strangely.
Within my own local school, the only university we were taken to was UCL and LSE. Most of my classmates that I keep in contact with, I think only half of us ended up going to university, and we didn't know about SOAS. The only reason why I knew about this place was because of my sister. She studied here. But apart from that, I don't feel, if she wasn't here, I don't feel I would have known. Most of the students you meet tend to come from a private institution, they tend to come abroad, and SOAS doesn't really have the training for us. For example, in the US, for students who come from disadvantaged communities, deprived boroughs, they have local mentors throughout their careers within the university, and I feel like we should have the same type of thing here.
My institution, to me, is exemplified and embodied by our experiences as BME students. So it's the way in which we're marginalised in academia, it's the way in which whiteness is seen as neutral and rational, whereas you have the complete alienation of black and brown thinkers.
Every module I take, I'm only taught by one person of colour, even those which are specialised in Africa or the Middle East. I only have come across one lecturer of colour, and my course is supposed to cover the Middle East, Africa. All of the perceptions that I'm getting are from people who have no real connection with the place that they're teaching.
I would say that there's still a long way to go in terms of decolonising the curriculum, simply because there's a lot of white scholars at the moment that study in these areas, and it's kind of like a white lens looking through those cultures. It's a difficult one to answer, because you don't want to say that a scholar from the Global South speaking on their region has more of a say, because the white scholar could have more of a valid opinion. But you want to include the voices of those people. You don't want to destroy the voices of those people, their own histories. It is their history after all. So what makes a person not from that region have more validity of that knowledge as opposed to someone who lives that knowledge, who experiences it every day? How can you say that the person who doesn't experience it has more right to say something about that than someone else?
I'm Eritrean. My parents came here around 30 years. I'm rounding it here, but 30 years ago. So they came because they were fleeing from war, so they were refugees and applied for asylum here. There was a very kind of close-knit community that sort of built, so everyone knew everyone. There was someone you could go to or rely on. Your friends became your brothers and sisters, your mothers and fathers. Everyone basically became your family, because a lot of them didn't have their family here or had left them or they'd passed away. That's meant that I've got a lot of family kind of scattered all over the world and hardly any back in Eritrea, sadly. I've got a lot of family here in London as well. That's meant like my engagement with the Eritrean community is, I guess, how I established my sense of culture and community and understanding of my background and who I am, I guess.
Where I grew up, Stoke-on-Trent, it wasn't very diverse, and so like I really wanted something that like not only like I could challenge like my knowledge, but also like learn more about myself, and then also like learn more about other people and other things, and like from a different perspective. Because like with most universities, you expect the same like monotonous white rhetoric. So I expected a lot from SOAS when I came here. And they definitely sell it like really strongly when you come to the open days. Unfortunately, it wasn't what I expected to some extent.
When I was younger, up until, I'm quite sad to say, quite recently, I used to never really try to engage and speak back in my language. Like I could say a few words here and there, but I used to just respond back in English. I used to think as well that it was just, I didn't see the point at first of speaking a different language, because I was in the UK, everything was in English, I spoke English, my friends spoke English, my exams were in English, everything was in English, so that just became the kind of default setting. Whereas obviously for my parents, Tigrinya is their default setting, and they've had to learn and adapt to a different kind of culture and language. So for me, it was almost like the opposite in a way, like trying to remember more and more, yes, I speak English, yes, you know, I've got a passport that like stamps me as a British citizen, but I'm more than that. Like my engagement with speaking my language now is a lot more stronger, I'd like to say. So now when I speak with family, I use Tigrinya. That's given me some sort of tie, I guess, to it all. I think if anything, that's one thing I sort of owe to SOAS almost, because it was like going there, I studied Arabic in my first year, and when I was learning Arabic, I then realised I'm learning this language that I couldn't speak before. I couldn't read, I couldn't write, I didn't know anything. But it's a language also spoken in Eritrea. As I was getting better and I could read signs on, you know, like chicken shops or whatever, like I then started realising, whoa, how am I getting good at this language and I can't even master my own language? That was sort of the catalyst, that thought one day, which then made me think, actually, I can't just be neglecting this beautiful thing, this sort of treasure that I have, that I've been blessed to have, that I haven't kind of taken advantage of.
When I study colonial history of South Asia, for example, in my classroom, that's a personal experience for me, and it's something I've had conversations with fellow students who talk about these theories and talk about these events in our classrooms, and it's a very real, it's a reality for us. Whereas I think for a lot of people, for some students, it's just something they study in a textbook and then they're over and done with. And I think that has a huge mental health impact as well on students, because we're studying our own histories. We're studying the histories of our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents. And it's hard to separate that from our experience as students. So I think when we ask who is SOAS for, we also need to ask how do people engage with SOAS differently.
The process of integrating and assimilating really has huge psychological impacts on people. So that's why it affects BME students in particular. It's hard to reach out to people and really know who to talk to about these things, especially when the facilities and the staff are so white-centred. And so just really having provisions in place to ensure that mental health is really tailored towards the needs of every student. So with that in mind, I did an event called Decolonising Our Minds, which focused on South Asians and mental health. And that was really to bring it to the forefront, make sure there was dialogue on the issue, and also within our communities it is a taboo, so just combating that.
SOAS to me was presented as this like beacon of diversity, a place where I could find more black and brown students than I would have found anywhere else in the country, or at least in London. It should be a crime that, you know, I can go into the African Studies department and have a hard time finding black professors that are willing to critique the school that they are in. I'm not saying that they all don't do that, but I'm just saying it's harder than I thought to find these students and professors. The vast majority of black and brown students here, you have to put money on the table and you have to help your family pay for bills. And generally, jobs that come out of studying culture like African studies aren't valued, especially not in a place like London. Law, politics, these are things that are, or conventional law and conventional politics, these are things that that are valued by London and England as a gigantic power. So you're more likely to be able to put bread on the table if you take these subjects, whether you like it or not.
There's like a polarization of like BME students that are really, really expecting a lot, and they're expecting a place where they can genuinely be themselves, and like the true expectation of a safe space is definitely SOAS. And then you come and then you get a lot of white students who aren't aware of this and are completely unaware of their own privilege. So then when they like use their like microaggressions and sometimes like actual macroaggressions and think that the whole of like their like classmates like anthropology subjects, like we exist outside of the classroom and on your gap year, we exist as students in ourselves. That was a massive shock to me, to see oppression on such a massive scale in the fact that I'm in an institution that prides itself in being so diverse, but then realizing that they're only using that to kind of get our money and get us to like sign up to come here. And it's just like very, very frustrating to have to like go from like trying to explain something to someone and them not caring and like always wanting receipts as to like why are you offended or like this isn't offensive, and having to have these debates. And also the whole like stop talking about race. I can't believe that that's still a thing at SOAS. Like you come here to study these things and you tell me not to talk about race. How can you like expect me to leave it in the classroom when it's the life that I live?
It's almost like we're relying on those who lecture us to tell us what to read. They will spoon feed you. I mean, they'll give you a reading list of about 20 or 30 different texts to look at. And it's funny how, even myself, I'm one of these people, I don't necessarily always question why have they chosen that specific text. You know, if we're talking about the Congo, for example, you'll have a bunch of French or Belgian economists writing about it, but why don't we have, you know, somebody who's directly from there, who knows about what's going on there, and maybe has a perspective of colonialization in itself and how that affects political economy. So I would read things on my reading list. And yes, I would gain your typical conventional knowledge, but I'm not pushing myself. My mind is still rooted in colonized knowledge, and I don't have a chance to separate that. And obviously, if you write in your exam anything that isn't put on the reading list, how can you get the grade you want to get? You're coming here to get a degree because you want to make a change in the world, but even if you're thinking radically now, you can't put that on, you can't put your pen to paper and do that through fear of not getting the grades you want. And if you don't get the grades you want, you're kind of jeopardizing the whole point of you learning this in the first place. So it's a bit of a confusing space. You have to kind of do your own learning on the side and always keep an open mind about what you're learning, but not actually express it in case you ruin your chance of making something of yourself, which is quite sad. So we need to change that. We need to give a space for students to feel comfortable enough to maybe write in their essay that they completely disagree with this reader, but not on the perspective of economic theory or thought, on the perspective of where the reader's coming from, what that writer's mindset is, how they put together their work. We don't need to always criticize maybe empirical rigorousness and robustness. Maybe we should criticize their lived experience and how maybe their theories are based on completely one-sided versions of history.
Fractionals at SOAS are called fractionals because we're young academics and PhD students who teach, and we have contracts that are paid a fraction of what a full-time member of academic staff is paid. Our campaign is one that focuses, on average, about 50% of the work we do here at SOAS, so teaching classes, marking essays, meeting students, isn't paid by the institution. So our demand is that all our work should be paid and that our work should be recognized. I think, as well as being a direct economic issue, it raises much wider questions about the institution specifically and academia in general. So numbers show that at SOAS, in the fractional staff, both women, black members of staff are overrepresented. Black women are, as a group, it's the group where they're the most concentrated. Once you look at the same numbers for permanent members of staff, the numbers are almost exactly turned around. Black members of staff and women are underrepresented in permanent posts. We know this in general about academia. I think it's 85 professors in the UK are black, and so there is a much wider picture of exclusion of black members of staff in education. I think that raises two questions. One, it raises a question of a stratification of the workforce, in which clearly white members of staff and men, white men in particular, are pushed more to the fore, are more likely to get promotions to become senior lecturers, professors, etc. But it also raises a question about knowledge production, I think, much more generally, and how these issues are linked, how particular forms of knowledge are prioritized over others, and how particular forms of knowledge are rewarded in academic institutions. And so I think a struggle for fair pay can not only be a struggle for fair pay, and it's one of the reasons why our campaign is called Fractionals for Fair Play rather than pay. It's because it's an attempt at saying that there is much wider issues at stake, much broader structural questions that need to be responded to. And I think that links directly to the aims of a campaign like one to decolonize the university, which is to recognize the labor of all members of staff, also the labor of women and black members of staff, and different forms of knowledge production, basically. And so I think our campaign goes to the heart of a lot of these issues in the structural organization of a university.
I set up with a couple of people, set up societies, and we tried to run events and conferences and things like that. That was a way of solidifying this idea of creating a network, an East African network, engaging with the diaspora and the tensions that kind of come with that, about this idea, what do you owe to your diaspora, if anything? Do you need to kind of go back and kind of find yourself, or whatever it is? In a way, I sort of benefited personally from that, because it is a real effort to foster a community and engage with one, particularly if it's not already there. So at SOAS, I noticed, for instance, we talk about African studies. I didn't find a lot that looked at East Africa, and a lot of the time, obviously, I found even in readings and lectures, when we spoke about Africa, it was quite homogenized as a country almost, which kind of bothered me a lot. And I think that's also what further pushed me to actually want to discover something about me, sort of where's my history? Even going to the library and looking at where the Eritrea section is, it's so tiny. Well, I'm glad it's even there to begin with, but that's also a big issue with kind of how work is disseminated in general. Who are the authors who are speaking? What are they saying? And how is that information captured? I think that's what kind of bothered and really just pushed me to try and do something. I guess I almost just realised that I didn't need SOAS in that way to do that anymore. That actually it was maybe almost always an internal thing that I just hadn't recognised in myself. Through my time at SOAS, more and more I just realised it was about my engagement with myself.
If I was in charge of the African Studies department, I would make more of an effort to connect the African continent to the diaspora more. And I think that's not really being done. So when I first applied to be here, I wanted to take a class called Black London or something like that, and it was supposed to, talk about black people in London came here, and it wasn't offered. And I also wanted to take another class that was supposed to talk about the links between black people in London and black people in the Caribbean, also not offered. So I would make more of an effort to connect those populations together. If you want to talk about really practical goals, I would make sure that there's a lot more black faculty in the department. Like I said, I'm hard pressed to find a lot of black professors and conveners in the department, which again I think is kind of criminal. If I had to pick a couple thinkers, Ta-Nehisi Coates, I think his name is Wayne Shirley. I think he's from Caribbean as well. Kind of staying in the overall goal that I pointed out, I would want to bring professors from Africa, from the Caribbean, countries like Jamaica, the Bahamas, where I'm from, Trinidad, the U.S., and in effort to sort of present a more holistic picture of what it means to be black, or what it means to be from Africa or of African descent. And I think that's not really being done here. And I was also told that it has extensive activist history, which is up my alley as well, because I do a lot of organizing back home.
I haven't really been involved in too much activism. That's another thing about SOAS. It seems like people protest anything and everything. That kind of puts me off, especially as I said, it's a lot of upper class white students that I do know the protesting. This might not be true, but this is the impression that I get as an outsider. It seems like they protest so that they can say they've protested. So it doesn't matter whether it's a big or small issue, they will protest it anyway. I'm down for protesting what's important, but when certain protests give the impression that they're just protesting for the sake of protesting, then that's where you've lost me.
There's a particular theoretical tilt towards Europe. Europe as the starting point of politics, Europe as the birth of international relations, and Europe also as the location where most of the knowledge which you use comes from. So most of the theoretical foundations of IR are formed by thinkers which come from the Euro-American world. And increasingly there is this kind of recognition that knowledge which has come from Asia, Central and South America can help us to understand how states function, how states interact with each other, what is politics, the most foundational question. I think the future of IR is looking better than it was even 5 to 10 years ago.
I think it's important because if it wants to keep its identity as a independent institution that has its own ideas, and I feel everyone within this local community here and the surrounding areas, they have ideas which could potentially help SOAS move forward. There are many challenges and issues that SOAS faces. For example, with the Justice for Cleaners initiative, that type of background is what many families within this borough have. And I feel if it engages with the local community, they will be able to understand more the needs of the people that work within the institution as well as the people that study within this institution.
So moving forward, it's important that we have black academics and ethnic minorities that are at the front of this movement, and for other academics to step back and realize this is their space and to actually realize the privilege which they are speaking with as well.
My first aim is to bring in more staff that are aware of the cultural sensitivities of students, so from a more diverse background, but also with experience working with this particular BME group.
I'm personally kind of concerned about the role of money at SOAS. This is not to say that I don't think that money is important. I was a banker for many years before I came to SOAS, so I well understand how important private contributions are to the health of the institution. I'm glad that the administration is interested in that. At the same time, however, money is a tool. It's not an end in itself. You have to think, well, if we someday have the objective of generating a 5% surplus, this is a number I've heard bandied about, is that an overriding factor over other long-term interests that the institution should have? Who are the constituencies that should have power over what happens at this place? I think one theme that is emphasized in this debate is individual rights, and trying to keep in mind always that this is a place of human beings. It's a place where individuals matter. We all contribute in our own small and large ways to SOAS, and this is something that should never be forgotten. Money is not our only asset. There's a particularly priceless asset which SOAS has, and that is its culture. I think it's absolutely unique. There's appreciation for critical analysis. People just don't take things for granted. They critically analyze, they try to have self-awareness. So when we're talking about this situation where money has become so important to the future of SOAS, you've got to consider, well, we've got this priceless intangible asset. You destroy that, it's going to be very, very difficult to come back.
The Students' Union here in the SOAS context, from my experience, because I can only speak from my experience, I found that it wasn't accessible to everyone. I felt like you have activism and you have a very particular type of student politics aimed towards very particular campaigns. Justice for Cleaners is a very racialized issue. It affects Latin American workers, but for some reason BME students aren't involved as much. But a lot of the direct action and protest tends to be dominated by white students. So I think the Student Union can do a lot more, because with SOAS, BME students have got involved in more the cultural side of things. So you have people setting up the Yemen Society, Somalia Society, Pakistan Society. People come from immigrant backgrounds who are, from the diaspora, setting up these societies in SOAS, which is a really amazing thing, but it's not really looked at as political, but it is a very political thing, because you have essentially children of the diaspora who come from Pakistan, Somalia, or Yemen, or North Africa, or Ghana, coming here, setting up their own societies on these names. They are engaging with the Student Union. So I think it's important for the SU to recognize that as political and bringing them into the fold a lot more when it comes to protesting. One really important thing is to diversify the way we protest. Decolonize is a better word, decolonize our forms of protest, because direct action isn't the only way of creating change. I think we have to reach out to all different members of the student body and BME members and tell them that there are different ways of protesting and enabling change.
So I think if you compare SOAS to other universities, in many ways you could find yourself happily surprised. There's a greater variety in the curriculum. There is certainly a greater variety in the members of staff, the different approaches that are proposed at SOAS. I think it's a much more heterodox university. I think all of that is true. However, I think there's often a jump from that, which is true, to a kind of idea that we've attained, a post-racial society, a liberated space, a liberated university, and I think that's very far from the truth. There's the example of the fractionals, there's the obvious example of the cleaners, the fact that, the maintaining of the university and of the building and the studying space is dependent largely on an immigrant workforce, mainly from Latin America, which is highly exploited, bullied, treated extremely badly, refused to be taken in-house and given equal rights and equal more paid than the rest of the staff by the university. I think that's one aspect in which we shouldn't kind of kid ourselves that SOAS is a fully liberated space.
One of the people in our group went to a local youth centre a while ago. She brought up SOAS. This youth centre's right here. The guy responded, "What's SOAS?" So that kind of indicates to you that we might think we're a big deal, but we're not. And at the same time, it also illustrates the real lack of interaction between this institution and the people outside of it who aren't directly involved in it. And I think universities are not just sites of knowledge and knowledge production, but they also have the ability to affect the communities around them. And they should be affecting them in a positive and beneficial light. Even students who aren't inside of the university, they don't have to be people who even want to come here, but higher education institutions can engage in community issues, social issues, especially in the surrounding area, and then even beyond.